The skateboarding genre is in a special type of area in the games industry right now. They're not booming and the trendiest sport in the world, and they're not overstaying their welcome and having their audience look for new experiences either. They're in a bit of a plane of existence where the time has been fulfilled in the spotlight and exist as a memory that doesn't have people just absolutely clamoring for more, but of which people are pretty satisfied with. They're in the same area as futuristic races, where the young developers that have released such games recently are independent and use the landmark genre titles as their elevator pitch, and the AAA companies sell their glory days in a fancy package. It's easy to see how the genre has passed its prime, obviously right now, but I've always loved skating games as they came and went, and it's a genre that I practically grew up with, so I want to talk about the ones that have the biggest influence on me, the industry, and the games I play today. When I was a young boy playing on the family PS2, there was much to be entertained by. I had Need for Speed Carbon, Incredible Hulk, and that Rayman racing game, I forgot what it was called, but there was this one game that remained hazy in my memory. I was no good at it, and I couldn't figure out how to play. But I remember going around on something in this factory with a lot of yellow stairs and molten bucket or something, and as well as a snowy area with a forest, and I tried my absolute hardest to get to, but I couldn't. It was a memory that stayed well within my mind as I grew up, and occasionally used all of my 2 brain cells to try and remember what that was, but even the cover of the game was hazy, and it remained that way for a very long time. Until I watched the Scott the Woz video last year where he talked about the best games of all time according to Metacritic, and I saw this screenshot. And then all of it came back to me. I have no idea how I overlooked what's basically the biggest and most influential skateboarding franchise ever made, and even weirder since I played Proving Ground around the same time and I remember that game. But anyways, I rediscovered my unknown childhood game in the middle of the pandemic last year, booted up PCSX2 and proceeded to have one of the most engaging and memorable gaming experiences of my life. Neversoft is a name synonymous with the 5th and 6th generation of consoles, having possibly the biggest break in the video game industry with the Cultural Revolution, introduced game-changing mechanics and rode the trend they created in a sequel, and with their newfound budget and success, they created what's considered to this day to be a unanimous arcade masterpiece. And I truly mean that. Outlets to this day consider 3 to be the best in the series and one of the best games ever made, while fans contest between 3 and the Underground games. That is how talented Neversoft were in their heyday. I felt lucky, being a person who's never experienced something that so many others have played, enjoyed, and tied out for however long this series has existed. And as soon as I started this game, I became addicted for the next week. This is considered the peak of the Pro Skater series, and Neversoft at their most innovative, influential, and creative. And while I haven't played any of these games, I'm confident in my stance as Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 as an absolute marvel in design, presentation, and execution. What's the biggest hurdle games need to go through? There's many things like design, presentation, mechanics, but I think one of the biggest ones, and is overlooked a little more than others, is aging. Times change, interests change, and standards definitely change. I find it very difficult to go back to retro games, especially early PS1 and specific PS2 games. Many of those blueprints from their era have been refined and modernized to the point where some games are just not as friendly as they were control-wise. So it says something then that Tony Hawk's Pro Skater's original controls, mechanics, and designs haven't aged a minute since its inception. I could play this and be completely fooled that it came out recently. During development of the original Big Kahuna, responsiveness and intuitive controls were top priority for Neversoft, and this definitely carried over to the next generation, as well as the jump to 60 frames per second. To this day, it's sublime, and I'm not playing on the PC version, this is emulated. The only dated thing about this game is the graphics, but more so the soundtrack, but in the best way possible. It's a time capsule of late 90s rock, rap, ska, with anyone who was relevant at the time making their appearance. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 doesn't have its Superman equivalent, but so many of them come close. Fast fire controls: X is to accelerate and ollie, square to do flip tricks, triangle for grind tricks, circle for grab tricks, left stick to move, and move it when you're pressing any of the trick buttons to do a trick. Off you go. So simple, but it's a very winning scheme. There is a tutorial, voiced by the Birdman himself, but the real magic of Pro Skater 3 comes from experimenting with this deceptively simple setup. Each trick type has, according to the stick direction, 8 different tricks at once at minimum, so you have almost no end to varying up your combos, and if you're good, fill that special meter to unlock special tricks, which are huge risks but have huge rewards. Risks as in they are more complex to pull off and take longer to do than regular tricks, but majorly add more points to your combo. It just comes at bailing much easier. Starting off, you'll be slipping into grind rails and bailing a lot, doing single tricks and single grinds to get comfy with these controls. Then you realize you can string together a grind and some kick flips to increase your score and multiplier, getting a little comfy. Start chaining together tricks and grind rails and getting risky with your grabs, getting somewhere. This is reading like green text. Adding special tricks and increasing your stats, varying up your combos to shake the score counter, failing, retrying quickly to get it all right. This growth is something you actively feel, but it's not over yet. For innovation, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 added a game changer in the form of the manual. Flick the stick vertically to manual and extend your combo when you get off a grind or a normal kicker ramp. Awesome stuff for inventing inventive lines. But after a vert ramp, you can't manual out that. It's gonna end your combo. Now, Pro Skater 3 introduces the simplest but the most groundbreaking mechanic this series has been graced with, the revert. Remember that vert ramp business that would end your combo? Now with a quick trigger pull, you can avoid that by doing a revert when you land, which can be followed up with a manual, and now your combos are essentially endless. Pro Skater 3 has let you off the leash, and the only thing that's able to stop you is your own skill. And what lets you do these skills is how effortlessly these maps are laid out, and designed for you to freestyle to your heart's content. Foundry, Canada, Rio, Airport, I can remember vividly how these areas are made for you to skate in with their lines, grinds, ramps, unique spots and secret areas. But what seals the deal is what you do within them. Tony Hawk Pro Skater's progression is based on completing objectives within these levels, and they're very specifically placed. I remember impressing the skaters in Canada, I remember delivering the plane tickets in Airport, I remember getting the axe to the guy in Suburbia. The skate letters, the bonuses, the secret tape, these are standard objectives across all levels, but achieved by learning the layout and mastering your lines to get these floating goalposts, and the extra objectives mentioned individualizes how iconic these levels are. And the iconic 2-minute time limit creates this sense of urgency to just get stuff done, even though you consciously know that it's gonna save every time you reboot. Hey, remember when this is about controls? Everything is connected. When you learn something new in the trick system, you learn something new in the maps, and your potential gets bigger and bigger because of it. As your potential rises, the more confident you're in when it comes to getting the secret tape and the extra objectives and getting to areas you would have never thought of mere hours ago. You go from how the hell does this work to, oh, I get it now, 100% the map and move on. The game continuously insults you and mocks you for your bails and mistakes, but once you get the hidden bonuses circling Airport and the top of LA, you're on top of the world. It makes you feel unstoppable because you overcame the challenge. You did it. You put the insults in their place. You worked, you failed, you learned, and you mastered it. This is the kind of joy I haven't felt in years. Arguably, I've never felt something like it prior. The more you look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, the more you see how Neversoft were geniuses of their time. This, to me, is why Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 is the best skateboarding, best arcade game, and one of the greatest games ever crafted. And I am willing to die on that hill. While Neversoft's peak would keep that crown to this day, the Birdman's hit series was beginning to lose steam around the start of the 7th console generation. I'd assume this was because with a new generation of consoles, more advanced technology and systems, making new original entries annually becomes unsustainable, especially in a series like this. Pro Skater moving from 5th to 6th generation annually was understandable. They just needed to make new levels, uncap the frame rate, and add some physics and graphics. Easy. However, new Tony Hawk games were adding cutscenes, stories, bigger worlds, new physics engines, scooters and motorbikes. All this new complicated stuff that was relevant in that era. More or less. Despite all this, the series was feeling fatigued. Everyone had their Tony Hawk fill, and seeing the name every year was too much. Activision was riding the genre as well as the Tony Hawk name into the ground, and alternatives didn't pick up the formula or change it. In 2007, Neversoft would put out Tony Hawk's Proving Ground, the last Tony Hawk game they would develop, and a game whose demo I would play excessively on my brother's PS3 because I didn't know better. The game didn't sell well and received more mixed reviews, a new low in the series. Maybe this is because of franchise fatigue, lack of originality, or Neversoft just not being able to whip it like they used to. But arguably, one of the biggest factors was that just a month before this game was released to the masses, EA Black Box popped out a little game called Skate. Skate came out at possibly the greatest time in 2007. The skateboarding subgenre was not too popular for people to stay with the Birdman, nor was it fatigued enough for people to write off games entirely on the basis that it's a skateboarding game. It was in between the two, where people were looking for a true competitor. And compete it did. Skate was a huge breath of fresh air for skateboarding fans and completely outsold Proving Ground on a 2-to-1 ratio, yikes. Skate wasn't just an alternative, Skate was the new king. But why was Skate so refreshing? That was something Black Box spent the development days perfecting. Tony Hawk Pro Skater's gameplay portrayed skating as sensationalized and unrealistic, prioritizing stringing up combos and doing the most complex trick with not that much input. One button will let you do a kickflip. It was fun, yes, but it got so ridiculous to the point where it's not even skating anymore. This is what separates skate. To do a kickflip in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, X, direction and square. To do a kickflip in Skate, you hold down the right stick and flick it upwards to a direction. In 2007, this threw many for a loop. A system which dynamically does tricks according to how you flick the stick was so much more advanced and inherently difficult for beginners, so much so that many outlets called the learning curve steep. What comes with this though is a gameplay experience which is much more realistic. Black Box wanted people to experience what it was actually like doing tricks on a skateboard. Want to do a trick? You flick it. Want to do a grind? Just jump on a ledge on a rail. Just jump on it. Want to do a nose grind? Move the stick upwards to move your skateboard upwards. Want to do a manual? Balance. This became known as the Flick It system, and although difficult at first, was an intuitive way to show off moves. The physics and gravity were heavy, and despite rendering at 30 frames per second, usually on the PS3 and Xbox 360, the game would read your inputs at 4 times that in 120 Hz, meaning that this was the most responsive skateboarding system at the time. But enough about the technical stuff. Is the Skate series any good today? Yeah, I'll come clean. I did learn about the series through PewDiePie sessions back in the glory days of 2014, when Macklemore was on top of the music world and YouTube Rewinds actually held relevancy. So the majority of my memories with this game was with the last in the series, Skate 3. I haven't played Skate 1 or 2, but to my knowledge 3 is technically the most content rich of the series, but not by a big margin. I played that and Skate It. And I'm not bothered to configure a million different motions to play that game in Dolphin. Speaking of which, you're watching Skate 3 being emulated on RPCS3 at 1080p 60. Sometimes. Fucking hate this RX 570. Skate 3 has you create a skating brand and you've got to do events, contests, get sales up. It's pretty simple. You have a whole city to explore, and said city is a prime candidate for skating. Basically anywhere is a spot to skate and do tricks without it feeling like a huge purposely made skate park. This is what's done best here. The philosophy of seeing everything around you as a thing to skate on is done very well. You can do street events, jams, races, freestyles, photo shoots, and lots of different events in different areas for you to get creative. And my personal favourite, Death Races and Hall of Meats, where you can fuck over other people down a dangerous line through the city, or fuck yourself up entirely for entertainment. It's hilarious. Aside from the city fun though, your knowledge of physics and the game's physics will give you an advantage in these events. You can get really good with the Flick It system, maximizing these short but more realistic combos and jams and stuff, and as with any open world, there's places where you can go absolutely wild. The Observatory Drop, the Super Mega Ultra Park, Danny Way's Hawaiian Dream, the game knows how to have fun with itself, and it definitely does. And while I can't access it through RPCS 3, Skate Park was a fantastic community-driven addition that let you test yourself, your creativity, or the game's limits. I spent dozens of my early teen years just messing around and making the biggest ramps I could and seeing how much airtime I could get, and I never got bored of Skate, despite its structure being very do this thing, and that's it. The Flick It system was just begging for so much experimentation, pushing you for how technical you can get, and what you can get away with when you're cocky. I'll never forget this game, and so many haven't. But one person did. Skate 3, at its release, was seen as worried to be the start of an annualized franchise, being released only a year and a bit after Skate 2. Instead, EA did the opposite. Black Box became entangled in the Need for Speed cycle again. Initially being the primary developer of Need for Speed before, during and after its apex, they were shut down in April of 2013, cementing that there were to be no more skate games from Black Box. This was during the nostalgia era of the genre. The Hawkman was gone and gearing up for a which further cemented EA's refusal to hand off skates, despite relentless fan plea. Nobody was willing to pick up the torch, but frankly, many people weren't super keen on it being lit. People who played skateboarding games had grown up, they had their fill, they had responsibilities, and above else, the skateboarding they knew wasn't the thing anymore, video game or otherwise. It was not in the public eye. But while this old subgenre was faltering, a new subset of the industry was booming, and one little developer in London decided to do something. Not to particularly innovate or follow trends, but remind the world what they had lost. There isn't that much to say about Ollie Ollie's development. Roll7 was a small studio that made educational and mobile games in the late 2000s as contract work to save up for funds to make their own games. But despite this obvious business goal, they really just kept up making prototype after prototype and hoping that something they'd get was a hit. In 2012, a senior development manager, Sony, played their prototype of a skateboarding game for half an hour before suggesting they develop it into a video game exclusively for the PS Vita platform. Yes! No information is left other than they released it in 2014. Thing is, Ollie Ollie was a landmark indie title, standing proud alongside the independent greats such as Hotline Miami, Binding of Isaac, Super Meat Boy and Limbo, testifying to the world what 1% of a AAA's budget and team size could accomplish. Seriously, in the BAFTAs, this game was up against
FIFA 15, Madden NFL 15, Forza Horizon 2, Trials Fusion.
And the BAFTA goes to Ollie Ollie.
and won. So let's see why. Booting the game up, there's no load screens past the first. You can fly through the menu and levels as fast as you please. Even on the Vita, Ollie Ollie knows to get you into the action and to get you in fast. For its trick system and structure, this is where the stars align. Ollie Ollie has the objective-based progression, combo stringing multiplier and downhill levels that occasionally appeared in early Tony Hawk, but with a similar flick-it system to Skate, having you hold any direction and let go to jump, or do rotations and let go to perform tricks. To grind, you have to hold any direction when you get close to a grindable object and jump off by doing a trick. But there's one more layer. The developer said that something that was never focused on in these games was landing, which to them was the hardest part of skating. You need to land your tricks with a button as soon as you hit the ground to cash out, and this is where the addiction comes from. Ollie Ollie is what we call an artificially driven game. Now that sounds obvious since it's a video game, but what I mean by that is that there's nothing to help you. Indie games in these times were rarely forgiving, known for their quick bursts of hard as nails gameplay, and Ollie Ollie was no exception. Bailing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, you get back up and keep going. Bailing Skate, no biggie, just get back up and your stuff is recorded. Bailing Ollie Ollie, you're done. Combo gone and it forces you back to the start to try again, whether you like it or not. And it's something I love about Ollie Ollie. You need to land. The game forces you to be attentive instead of methodical. Doing your stuff at the right time takes priority over what you do, even if you can get fancy. Because like Hotline Miami, one wrong move brings about your downfall. Literally. Except Hotline Miami gave you the decency of checkpoints when at different floors, but that's by design. Games like that are meant to have things go from 0 to 100 in a millisecond, forcing you to plan your strategy out. Ollie Ollie focuses less on planning and more on improvisation and keeping up the pressure at 80%, gradually rising as your combo gets larger and larger, as only you're able to guide this heaping anxiety to the end. And it doesn't help when some of these objectives are a level long combo. But again, it's something I love about it. The only help the game gives you is acknowledging that you're going to fail a lot. But like many games, using difficulty in such a way, it's more than worth conquering to do it all over again. Ollie Ollie is repetitive by design, varying things up with new objectives such as things to collect, tricks to do, and score milestones to accomplish, getting more and more ambitious the more you progress. And there's many levels, 25 normal, 25 pro, and rad mode, where you're required to be a perfectionist on every level, totaling around 100 to choose from. And the levels themselves are meticulously crafted to just squeeze your way through their hazards and lines and learn how to maximize your combos through repeat playthroughs. From a mechanical and design perspective, Ollie Ollie is hard to fault. It's a hard game to abuse its systems, and the only issue I have with it is things that are grindable and things that are hazards could be slightly better shown. Other than that, it's an indie classic. They also released a sequel. Yeah, I got time. Welcome to Ollywood was released a year after Roll 7's hit game, with the pixel art style is out, replaced with a more vibrant and smooth palette with more tricks, mechanics, locations, and soundtrack. I don't mention the soundtrack for these games, but they fit amazingly with the tone and vibe of Ollie Ollie, chill beats that keep the pace going. Ollie Ollie pulled the Pro Skater on itself and introduced the manual. This was huge. The structure of Ollie Ollie allows the manual to have you make an infinite long level combo however you see fit. Awesome. And then there's grind switching, a mechanic that lets you change what trick you're doing when grinding. This is mostly useful for repositioning yourself if you want to do a specific trick off a grind, which the game will demand of you. Sick. Then they introduced the revert, which is generally just to up your combo multiplier effectively, despite being a bitch to do. And you can revert manual, which is to start a manual within a revert, increasing your multiplier once again. I hope you've noticed a pattern here. Ollie Ollie lets the player off the leash, letting them be free to maximize their combos how they see fit. But this lets them beat stuff a little easier. Hollywood isn't an easy game, in fact its opening levels are still a difficult trek to master. But for returning players, it won't be much more of a drastic challenge getting the score thresholds. But that's okay. Hollywood compensates with more experimental, complex level design, and levels with more detail and vibrance, and generally just more thought out gameplay. It's a textbook sequel, but doesn't top what came before, just stands by it. All in all, Ollie Ollie isn't new or old. It's entirely its own thing, and in my opinion, it's what I would call a celebration of the genre. Ollie Ollie signaled something. Skating was an art form of the past. The designers themselves explained their music choices from Tony Hawk and Skate before realizing that it didn't fit with the game or their tone. Times were changing and more people came to terms that decks weren't coming back to dominate our screens or the sports. Which leads us to today, where the genre is receiving interesting treatment, and it's a very surprising treatment. It's been 21 years since the first Pro Skater revolutionized gaming and sports as we know it, and it has been lovingly remastered by a studio that respects its feats, and the publisher who devoured it said studio unfairly. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is now cemented as something past its glory days, and better for it. Skate has been bullied into existence, EA realizing that they're sitting on a beloved brand which used to compete against another beloved brand, which said brand is now coming to eat its lunch. The original designers and creators have been called back to form Full Circle Studios within EA, where they announced only in 2020 at the end of EA Play that development on Skate 4 had begun. Not even seeing gameplay, yet the internet was on fire hearing this news, and the developers have kept quiet, yet kept our expectations reasonable. They're telling us it'll take time, and the community is more than okay for that. And in the indie scene, games like Skater XL and Session have strived to take back hearts with the skate-like realism, but Roll7 is coming back with their latest yet, Ollie Ollie World, a free-flowing action game, saturated and cartoony, and lively, and looks like their most ambitious project yet. If anything, this history lesson of how this genre has changed is a lesson of how things never stay dead forever. All these games that spawn from each other are thriving to this day, so if there's a genre you think is dead, or something that hasn't been in the industry since yesteryear, probably in the minds of people who have the power to make them strike lightning once again. All that's needed is the drive to make them start. Okay, bye bye.